I wanted to talk a little bit about a bodhisattva. So I'm going to talk about what a bodhisattva is and what that means. So I don't know if everyone here has heard this word before, bodhisattva. Yes. Maybe you can put your hands up if you know what it is. Oh, yeah, okay, good. So some people know, some don't. Great. But really, it's just because when you it was just so striking to be in Japan again. It was particularly striking also for Prasanna Deva because it was the first time that he's been in a Buddhist country, or in a country with a strong Buddhist culture, at least. He comes from Ireland, and other than your small little Buddhist center that you go to here, you don't really see much of Buddhist culture. So it was just really, really great to be reminded of, this. Just this richness of culture, this richness of iconography. And then as I was saying to you guys, I think one of the first times that I gave a talk here, when I talked about my own journey to Buddhism, it was really mostly through the iconography, the statues, the culture that got me really hooked onto Buddhism. So I really resonate a lot with iconography, with symbols, with metaphors, with myths, and this is sort of how I seem to get into Buddhism, or that's how I seem to connect to the teachings. Which usually people wouldn't guess, because I also study a lot, so people always think I'm much more of a sort of heady study type, because I can remember all these lists and dates and whatnot. But actually what I'm moved by is symbols and stories and stuff like that. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about one particular symbol, basically, in Buddhism, which can teach us a lot about how we practice on a day-to-day basis. I mean, that's the beauty of Buddhist symbols, is that even though usually they can sometimes seem very abstract, or very like, oh, it's just about the ideal, it's just ideal this, ideal that. It can feel like, yeah, well, what does it have to mean? What does it have to do with us? But what I find so beautiful about these images is that they sort of, symbols seem to have a truth on every level. They seem to have a sort of truth on, or a meaning on every level, really. So, what that image of a bodhisattva, which I will explain in a minute, tells us, is true on a day-to-day basis, is true on a deeper meditative basis. It has something to say about deeper states, as much as it has something to do with how we just practice when we try to get up in the morning and things like that. So it just has all these sort of symbols. They touch all layers of truth almost. Yeah, this is what I find interesting about them, that they're not just these sort of faraway ideals. So I just plunge right in. So bodhisattvas are these symbols that you can encounter in in temples usually. So if you want a homework, then I give you the homework of, if you live in Japan or in India as well, probably you can just go to a temple nearby and find a bodhisattva statue and see how it's different from a Buddha statue. When we went to Nara, in the Nara National Museum, they give you this lovely pamphlet that explains to you the differences, in like this manga style, the differences between Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. They have like all these kawaii faces and stuff. It's quite cute. It's good with Japan. It's like they don't take anything too seriously. I really like that. It's really, really good. So the Bodhisattva is also, it's basically a different way of talking about enlightenment. Yeah. So bodhisattvas are also enlightened beings. The Buddha, his disciples also gained enlightenment. But the bodhisattva is a different way of talking about, of imagining what enlightenment looks like. Yeah. Buddhists for centuries have tried to grapple with this idea. What is enlightenment? What is that goal? It's the whole point of enlightenment is that you can't understand it or grasp it with your current mind. Yeah, so with the current mind, we can't really understand enlightenment. So for the unenlightened mind, we somehow have to understand what this is about. Yeah, we somehow have to imagine what that would be like. And this symbol, this image of a bodhisattva, is one that is it's just a different way of talking about it, a different way of imagining it. It emerged when Buddhism had become a bit too stale, a bit too stifled, a bit too boring, maybe, a bit too literal minded. The first image, obviously, that we had is just the Buddha himself. Yeah, the Buddha himself. Usually we imagine a Buddha probably as a sort of seated figure, a figure that's sort of deep in meditation, very restful, a very concentrated, still, silent sort of figure. Yeah. I actually got one here. I mean, you all know what a Buddha looks like, but this is a Japanese Buddha right here. Yeah, so this is a sort of, very, very beautiful, but very kind of, seated, meditating, very still, alone on his own, etc., etc. So this is it's a very, very good image for enlightenment. It's a very, very good symbol, but it can lead to misunderstandings. It can lead to us thinking that Buddhism is about, just sort of sitting in our little room and not caring about the world and just sort of meditating happily along and trying to cut out people out of our lives and sort of just being really introverted and quiet and, sort of sad faces and solemn attitudes and stuff like this. That image can be created. And actually, when Buddhism got introduced in Europe, for example, a lot of that misunderstanding carried on as well. So sometimes people here in Berlin also, they come with this image of Buddhism being very quiet and very solemn and very sort of calm, and you have to sort of speak very quietly and calmly and mindfully and very sort of solemnly. So you see, images can have a sort of front and a back. And the front, it's a really good image because meditation in Buddhism is about calmness and mindfulness and quietude, but not only about that. So then the tradition around 2,000 years ago came up with a different image, one that is that tries to sort of rectify the misunderstandings of that first image. Yeah. So they say, okay, a very, very good meditation, calm, just caring about yourself. That's all very good. Continue to do that. But there's another aspect of it as well. There's this aspect of energy as well. There's an aspect of outward focus, of altruism as well involved. Yeah. So we do not only practice for ourselves, we practice ideally for, the benefit of the world, to put it again in a very grand setting, a very big idealistic setting, or at least for other people, at least for a sort of direct environment. Yeah. Not going to save the world one breath at a time, but they were trying to show, okay, so there's different elements to Buddhist practice. Buddhist practice isn't just about sort of withdrawing. We talk a lot about reducing input, for example, sort of cutting out input that we get. There's a lot of talk, especially in traditional Buddhism, about renunciation, letting go of things, letting go of attachment. So it can seem as though Buddhist practice is a lot about, just sort of escaping the world. Yeah, escaping the world. So they wanted to create a different image, which is more of a symbol of, okay, it is also about something active. Yeah, energy is a big part of it as well. Going out into the world, helping is as much part of practice as it is to withdraw and to be quiet. So I wanted to sort of explore that a little bit with you guys, because that is an ideal which is sort of true on the highest level, but it is also true on just our day-to-day level. Actually, I could probably show you an image because I showed you an image of the Buddha. This is another traditional image of a Bodhisattva. So this is then what a Bodhisattva could look like. Yeah. So this is another Japanese image. So this is Jizo in Japanese, or in Sanskrit it's Kshitikarbha. So very different, right? So he's standing. He has a pilgrim staff. and the symbolism is quite different here. Yeah, so he's not sort of withdrawn, but he's actually walking towards you. Yeah, well, he's standing at the moment, but sometimes he's shown as walking. I mean, in Japan you get him with loads of babies as well, but that's not the traditional imagery. That's actually just emerged in the last few hundred years or so, especially in the 90s. Anyway, yeah, so usually he's not shown with babies, but you do see him a lot with babies in Japan. Yeah, so this is then that different element. That's that element of okay, so practice is also about going out into the world. It's also about going into out of yourself as well. So on the sort of absolute level, what that means, on that sort of high ideal level, what that tells us about enlightenment is that enlightenment seems to be a state where where sort of your inward focus, what we call the wisdom element, your deep meditations, your the things you would do on a retreat, the silence, the stillness, you just sort of sitting in a sort of state of harmony, of seeing the things as they really are, and also your compassionate element, the element which is sort of outflowing, which is spontaneous help, where you just go out into the world, where you just sort of are with people. These are completely in harmony. Yeah, so these are not different. So you're getting deeper and deeper in meditation on the level of enlightenment is the same as you going out into the world, helping beings, trying to liberate beings, being altruistic, etc. Yeah. So traditionally, this is described as that the Bodhisattva, that figure, is a sort of has put the vow out there to liberate all beings through their practice. Yeah. So through their practice. To gain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. Yeah, so this is that big ideal. That's what we call the Bodhisattva ideal. Again, this was a way of saying, of sort of rectifying an element of Buddhism which got lost in sort of early Buddhism after the Buddha died. Mainly because the Buddha himself was absent. He died, so people didn't have him as an example anymore. But basically, you find that element in his teaching as well. You always see him going from place to place, trying to teach, constantly teaching. But at the same time, he was able to remain in complete meditation, in complete harmony, in complete stillness as well. So then this Bodhisattva image that tries to it represents wisdom and compassion in unity. Yeah, there's no question of, oh, do I now go out and talk to people, or will I sort of do a bit of self-care, a bit of self-love, and just sort of stay at home? There's no question of that. You're doing both at the same time. Yeah, it's both at the same time. You're both active and passive. Yeah, it's paradox. it's an ideal on an enlightened level. That difference doesn't exist anymore. So this is on the ideal level. This is it's described as, when you get enlightened, it's as if you see all these beings who are not enlightened yet, and you want to help them. You just see all the suffering, and you want to help those beings, and you vow to save them all. You vow to teach them. You vow to sort of do anything you can to help alleviate the suffering, while at the same time you realize that there's actually, in reality, there's no beings to save. Yeah, this is the traditional way of putting it. The Bodhisattva has vowed to save all beings, whilst knowing that in reality there's no such thing as a being to save, because in reality, well, everything's changing. Things are, beings pop up and die again, and everything's coming and going. So, where do you then see that the distinctness of things? So, this is what we sort of sometimes call emptiness. Is that view that actually, if you really looked into the world, you wouldn't be able to put a box or a name or label on things, because everything's just process. We as beings, we are process. The world is process. So how could you say that there's anything out there that needs saving? Yeah, because everything's just process anyway. So it's that deep realization, at the same time seeing that there is actually suffering and people do need help. But yeah, so the Bodhisattva manages to kind of hold these two views at the same time. Yeah, the Bodhisattva, when you're enlightened, you seem to be able to help and alleviate suffering whilst not being affected by it. I think that's what it means, is you're not being affected too much by it. You don't internalize it too much because you realize, oh, you still have this sort of wisdom perspective. You manage to keep that. I do think that's, I mean, here in Berlin, we get a lot of, especially here in Kreuzberg, we do get a lot of people who are very active in social activism or these sorts of things. And they always say that, they quite easily burn out, they quite easily get frustrated, they get overwhelmed. And they do say, yeah, it's because of that. It's just because it's a one-sided activity. You give a lot. Yeah, you try to, you're giving a lot into the outside, but there's not that element of self-development, or there's not that wisdom perspective there that, obviously on its own level, all these sort of overwhelming problems in the world, they can't be changed, they can't be solved within one, lifetime or something. There's always, the more you help, the more problems will also pile up. But then the answer is not to help either. It's like it's not, that can't be the answer either. So again, this it's an incredibly fascinating symbol. It's an incredibly fascinating question. How do we practice in a way that's not too self-focused, where it's just about sort of us in our own, cozy comfort zone, where we sort of always stay in our little sort of comfort zone, but also where we don't just sort of burn out all the time, and where we just sort of give out of a place that it doesn't have abundance, that doesn't have sort of richness, that doesn't have perspective. So maybe you can ask yourself, what is your motivation for meditation? Where can we find that balance of being there for people, being generous with our time, but also, making good space for our own practice as well. And I'm noticing that personally a lot in my own work here in Berlin at the center, because I work for the center, and that can be quite challenging because there's a lot of demands. I mean, sometimes Buddhist centers can be black holes. Ayabando always says it's like a black hole because you can just put all this energy, all this work in there, and there's always so much more you can do. There's always so much more events you can put on, more classes you can put on. The website could do with another update or whatever. Marketing could be better. There's always something you can do, and I always need to sort of watch that tendency of either I become a bit too sort of self-preoccupied and think, oh, it's all too much and I need more time for myself, and oh gosh, I wish I was on retreat, or I wish I could just go away. But that can become a sort of story in itself. That can become a sort of vicious cycle in itself, when you just sort of, it can just become like a habit that you don't want to sort of push yourself, or you don't want to step out of your comfort zone. You just always, just the slightest sort of unpleasantness or sort of tension that comes up, you think is, you need to just look after yourself. But I can also tip then quite easily into the other direction as well, and just feel overly responsible for everything. Like when the class doesn't have a great turnout, I can think, oh God, we need to work more. We need to do much more, more marketing. Okay, more this, more that. I need to put on more talks in the center, stuff like that. I can sort of overly feel responsible for that as well. And the times when it's felt most satisfying is when I was managing to sort of put both these attitudes together. Yeah, when I was managing to give a lot of talks, meet up with a lot of people, but at the same time always feel like I'm in touch with myself. I'm in touch with my own inspiration, with my own practice. It doesn't feel like I then want to just crash out and be like, oh my God, I worked so much, I need to just put my feet up. It all feels quite fulfilling. So there is this sort of Buddhist practice seems to happen in that fine line, in that fine tension between sort of giving and also staying in touch with your own inner processes with your own mind, which is what we're trying to work on in meditation. It's quite striking sometimes to see our more experienced order members. Like, as I was saying, my Trabanda, he was here for a weekend, and he just is constantly on the move. Like, I was a bit exhausted, and he's over 60 years old, and he has much more energy than I have. Because I think he was here for 5 days, I think. And he led 6 events in the center on those 5 days. And then like 2-hour events or something, he led all of those. And then at the same time, he was also meeting lots of people, meeting up with people. And he never needed more than half an hour break or something. He just, he always had just half an hour break. He said, okay, I have a little nap now. And then he had a nap. And then he was like, okay, next, what are we doing now? And then I had to come up with some new thing. So maybe you could try to see if you can sort of watch that. Is meditation making you more able to be yourself, be with others, give? Is there that sort of sweet spot that can you find that sweet spot where you can be engaged, where you can give, where you can be generous with your time and your energy, but at the same time stay very sort of connected with your own inspiration, to your own practice. I think I'll leave it here for now. But so it was just a bit of a little ramble about. I did actually find my notes. I thought I deleted my notes, but I managed to retrieve them. So maybe I'd like to hear from you a bit. Can you recognize this tension? Have you noticed this tension in yourself before? Maybe you can share a bit about that, what that feels like for you.
I think I remember feeling that tension before practicing meditation, the way I do now. Yeah. And sometimes it was overwhelming, like doing something for other people. Yeah. And then you feel exhausted at some point, or there's no point in this. Yeah. What am I doing? Or just leave everything you're doing and stuff. But with meditation, everything, like, okay, you kind of like get grounded. Yeah. And you touch ground and get more into reality, I would say, because it's a lot of the times is your mind bombarding you with negative stuff. Oh, does it, is it making any sense? I don't think it's making any sense, like your mind saying in the back of your head. But with meditation, you kind of like, okay, it's okay. Yeah. So I kind of like, meditation helps a lot also in that sense. Yeah. Like being kinder, to being more aware of this, more positive. Yeah. And yeah, it's really nice. And just today you mentioned something that um well, a lot of people relate Buddhism with suffering, right? And like they highlight the suffering part. And not recently I met a person from Ireland, actually. Yeah. And then he said, I mentioned that I was a Buddhist, and he said, like, oh yeah, you guys focus so much in suffering. Yeah. Yeah, this is it's like, what kind of religion is that everything for you is suffering? And I go like, no, quite the opposite, because it's like you have to recognize that there's some suffering in your life. It's like you don't know that you have an alcohol problem until you have to recognize, you have to realize that you have that problem. Yeah. Then you seek for professional help, or you just go to AA or something. So I had to explain it that way. It's like you have to recognize that there's some suffering in your life, and then you can do something about it. Yeah. And so Buddhism is about not suffering, but it's doing something about your suffering. Yeah. And
The interesting thing with suffering is that it's not a, I mean, we always talk about it because the Four Noble Truths contain it. Obviously, they're all about suffering, but it's not like suffering is like the main doctrine of Buddhism or something. It's not, it's just an application of the teaching, really. It's just saying that, things have conditions and they arise in dependence on conditions. So he just talks about the Buddha just chooses suffering because, and he uses in this really broad way of, from slight physical pain to big existential loss or something. And it's just because everyone has it. So he just uses an example that is just present. But it's quite interesting because there's a lot of other places in the scriptures where he uses the same four noble truths, but with different things. Not just suffering, but I think in one he even talks about faith, and in one he talks about joy. And he also is just saying, what is the how does it arise? How does it cease? And he's just trying to sort of he's not trying to make a point about suffering. I don't think he's just trying to make a point about, how does this world exist? Why do we exist as people? What's our mind? How does it create the world in a way? Yeah. That's interesting, isn't it?
it is.
But yeah, but there's suffering. Suffering is maybe just one of those words which just sounds so it just really means like, well, as on all levels, there's life isn't what you expect it to be. It's like it never is what sometimes we get that horrible feeling of, life presents us with something and then we think, oh, that's not what I signed up for. That's not how I expected my life to go. He just uses that word suffering for that.
Yeah, that's right.
You mentioned energy, Dharmasara, and Bodhisattva. And when I started going along to Triratna activities, in particular when I went on retreat, this term retreat is like retreating from the world. But what I found would happen is after the retreat, I had so much more energy, and I wanted to sort of like dive back into my work, and it was that sort of withdrawal from the world that gave me energy, because I had to look more at myself, which wasn't easy at all. But the net effect of sort of a strategic withdrawal from the world, going on retreating, had this effect of developing more energy from within that I had then to give, and almost excited to go back out into the world. Sometimes I, maybe too much energy and I crashed a bit, but over the years, and this is like in our Triratna culture of going on retreat, it's not like in a lot of Buddhist cultures you have to join the monastery and you're on retreat all the time. And yeah, you're developing, and you're developing energy and wisdom. But we can do the same regardless in going on retreat and then back into the world regular, in a sort of consistent way. It builds, I think it builds a momentum, which is what I've found over the years, and choosing your retreats, and it's a big commitment as well. But I was just fortunate enough to come along at a time where the work I was doing also supported my retreat, and I was living with the people I go on retreat with. So it's quite a whole culture. But really fortunate. But it's possible even just going on camping retreats with friends, sometimes out into nature, sometimes would even have that flavour of being on a retreat and feeling more energized, and maybe like going on the hike on the Saturday might have even had that.
Yeah. But it's interesting what you're saying. It's not just, I think that tension is not just about, and I just used that example of helping or being active, but yeah, I think what it just means is, sometimes you need to break from the world and then you need to go back into the world, whatever that means. But yeah, it really seems to be that this is where practice happens or something, at least. Sangh Rakshta, or the founder of Triratna, he was very, you seem to be convinced that this is how you do it, and not just withdraw completely from the world and then sit in the monastery, which is actually, I mean, that's always the image we have of traditional Buddhism, or at least I had, is that people just sort of go off to the mountains and then they vanish. But it's actually not, traditionally, that's not how Buddhism was practiced for most of the time. It was, you did have those monasteries on the mountains where people would go to train, but then they would always come back into the city as well. It was always that, traditionally, there's always been that back and forth as well. I think to give a Japanese example, I think Hakuin was very keen on that. The 17th century Zen master Hakuin, he was saying, yeah, you need that change between city and countryside. Just be for yourself, or just be out of the world, away from responsibilities, so that you can then come back to the world, to distractions.
Is that to sort of like challenge oneself into like keep growing into the practice, or like?
I suppose so. I mean, it doesn't feel challenging, but I guess it is a bit about I think it's a bit like you need to, well, we are all in the world, or whatever the world means, in our daily life, or in a big city. So we all have all sorts of experiences. And then I think you need to, a bit like in your daily meditation, you need to sort of cut all the input out, to think and reflect on what you've encountered, what you've experienced. You need to sort of digest your experience a bit, gain a new perspective on your experience, and then get back into the situation so that you can then, make new experiences with that new way of seeing things, and then the experience will change. You will have a new way of seeing things, but then you obviously get used to that, and then you need to, yeah. I think that's the point of meditation. So meditation and retreats, they're not they don't happen on their own in a way. They happen in a constant back and forth between experience and withdrawal or something. I mean, when you go on retreat, I mean, hopefully we will manage to put on a retreat at some point again for you guys. It's like it could feel sometimes as though the main work is during that retreat while you're out there in the countryside meditating for a long time. But actually, the main work is when that thing stops and you go home. That can be the most challenging time of the retreat. Or there you can really feel what's happening, because you've changed your mindset, and then you move back into a different world almost. It can sometimes feel quite weird. But you do then sort of notice that how much your mind affects your perception. You're a bit more transparent or something, and you're a bit more transparent, a bit more susceptible to the minds of others as well, and what kind of mental states they are. The city always feels quite crude and quite kind of a bit too busy, a bit too like, oh God, what are they on about? Like when I come back from solitaries usually, so I'm going on a solitary again, which means that it's like a retreat just by yourself. And I usually go to Spain for that, to our retreat center called Guccialoca. The longest one I've done is 2 weeks, but this time I'm challenging myself to 3 weeks. Yay. Every time I come back from that, it's like, I just think, why are people so crazy in the cities? What do they want? It's like, it's really weird. You just think, why is everyone so weird? Because you just get really used to being very content with little. You're just in this amazing nature. You just have this little hut with one room. You just cook the same food every day. You just sort of are happy to look at trees, and then all of a sudden you come back to this really complicated system that is the city. It's really strange. I mean, it's usually the first city I encounter is like a tiny little city, or more like a town in Spain, called Villajoyosa. But even that is kind of, it's like, oh my God, everything's really weird. But that's a good experience, and then you get used to it again, and then you go back away. Yeah. Or Berlin. The worst is always coming back to Berlin. I mean, Berlin people are weird. It's like it's It's even the worst is when you come back from Japan, because President Abe was so shocked when he came back. He thought, why are all these Japanese people on the flight here with us? What do they want in Europe? There's nothing for them here. It's everything's just so chaotic and rude and not polite, and it's a bit like that. It feels a bit like that coming back from retreat. And so
I wanted to just say something about the tension that you mentioned. I guess just give a little example or just share something where I felt like that might have happened, because as I said, I haven't never meditated really. Like, I guess this is the first time I'm taking it seriously, but in uni I got a chance to have some classes on Buddhist philosophy and felt like I got quite a bit from it. And one thing I struggled with a lot during a long time as well was like sharing common spaces with other people, especially if the common spaces weren't kept in the way that I thought, like nicely for everybody. So I could get very easily like frustrated and exhausted with just continuously like putting in the effort to clean my own things whenever I, used something that was from the common space, and then seeing other people not doing the same and wondering, like nobody is ever going to complain about having a clean space. So why is it that not everybody understands that, we should indeed. And I guess it has changed for me, especially like during, I guess, my last year living in the Netherlands. That frustration and that constant sort of like tension of just being like, has like, I'm gonna step into the kitchen. Is the kitchen gonna be like spotless or not? And yeah, I guess I just learned how to. I got more comfortable with putting in the effort for, doing at least what I thought was the way things should be. So like keep, if I use something, cleaning it right afterwards and all, but being more understanding of the fact that there might be a bunch of reasons as to why other people might not do it, either automatically or whatever, and also just accepting that not everything can always go the way that I want, so I can keep on trying to make that, like, so I can keep putting in my own effort to making that a reality, but I cannot control how other people at the end of the day actually like maintain or not that space. So yeah, there's like only so much I can do, and I guess I just have to like rest in peace with the fact that, I can only do so much, and that made it so much more enjoyable to like share a house with other people.
Yeah, you need that, don't you?
Yeah, I guess that's probably like, I guess maybe it's a funny example, but I feel like there was tension in there a lot, and it has been something that's changed for me. And made a big impact, even though it's just about having a clean kitchen. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good example. Yeah.
Great example, because it's just things. It's things you can physically do, and a space that you can work on. But when it comes to other people, say you're living with or you're married to, or and it's their views, it's their habits. It's that is yeah, having to put up with having to work with other people's habits and characters that maybe you wouldn't choose like to live with, or they turn out to be in a particular way, or they just have particular habits that start to really don't like that. So it's a good, I think it's a good sort of working ground with things and spaces, and it also might be people's character, but when it comes to the more sort of nitty gritty of having to be around the same people all the time, and who you love, or you might not know that well, but there's this the tension of holding their character lightly, and in your views of how you think things should be, And so I'm just thinking of myself and my dad or my mum, and it's like I've got to keep sort of letting go of my expectations of them being a certain way, or it's like why do they say it like that? You know, being like triggered, this awful term, triggered by
Yeah.
my parents. but it's
For me, it's yeah, to think that there's nothing that they have to change in themselves, right? Because you think, oh, there's something wrong with the way they think, act, or something, but it's to switch that mentality within yourself to think that there's nothing that they need to change. Everything is within myself, right?
Mm.
Which is, I experience all of that every day. And yeah, it's hard, and I'm also trying to just focus on myself and like how I view those things, right? Like, and how I let those things affect me. No?
Yeah, that's why I guess like what you said reminds me of the idea of like letting go of like of the self in Buddhism, or that idea. So like the self is the one that I guess is in constant change, or rather, I guess you cannot grow too attached of your own worldviews, and you need to have the ability to, I guess, adapt to the situation in order to suffer as little as you can or you want. So in that sense, you cannot have really like that idea of, oh no, this is who I am, and like this is what I hold on to. So it's not me, it's not me who has to change. It's that person, or is the space, or I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of managing to keep it lightly somehow, huh? Yeah. Well, I've just realized you can't change anyone anyway. The only thing you can change is your own mind. So it's
Like you can try to change things, but I guess you just cannot let yourself go frustrated if that doesn't happen.
yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, you can obviously try to change your environment, but it's not. You should if you feel like it, you can do it, but there's no guarantee that it'll work. Yeah.
Like the activists you were mentioning just now. I was also in the Netherlands for a few years, and we like in universities as well. Like I could see so much resentment amongst like students all the time, especially when it came to, and I obviously am like understanding and empathetic towards it. Like there was some protests about like a lecturer that got fired, and because she wrote a paper on like assault in like in the university, about the university as a case study itself and all that. So there was like a lot of emotion popping to the surface, and people were so so there was just some, I don't even and I mean, of course I respect so much like the passion and the will, the will to like try and change and make things better. And but I felt like everybody was so burned out at some point, because I guess
that does happen.
saying that, you know, I guess having that perspective of things might, you know, I can only do so much, maybe feels like a betrayal almost of like that mission that you have within yourself, and that will. It's like, oh, but if I say that, then I'm just going to conform, I guess, to the way things are, and nothing will ever actually change. I don't know, like that thin line, right? So.
Yeah.